Hello everyone.
In the weathered, factory-tired town of Willow Creek, Ohio, the streets whispered with the size of what once was. Cracked sidewalks wound past shuttered factories, and aging homes leaned into themselves as if tired of standing. At night, you could walk several blocks and only hear the hum of old street lamps or the far-off echo of a passing train. The town didn't bustle. It endured. 24-year-old Natalie Cooper worked the night shift at Waypoint 24, a roadside convenience store lodged between a pawn shop and a used tire lot. It stood on the edge of town like it had been placed there by accident, its fluorescent sign stuttering into darkness every few seconds. The roads that led to it were long and quiet, visited mostly by truckers passing through or locals too restless to sleep. To most, it was just a gas station. To Natalie, it was survival. She had once dreamed of something different. Paramedic school, white coats, saving lives. But dreams were luxuries when bills came before the sun. Her father had died alone in a bus terminal, unemployed, out of pride and options. After that, Natalie left school. Her mother, Elaine, had collapsed under grief but kept going, pushing through 2 cleaning jobs despite inflamed joints and a spine that protested every bend. Their life shrank to a small upstairs apartment above a laundromat, where the heat wheezed like an old man and the thin walls leaked sirens into the night. Still, Natalie never complained. She wore resilience like a second skin, unspoken, stitched from years of quiet sacrifices. In her backpack, tucked beside her meals and notebooks, was a worn journal. Inside were quotes from her late grandfather, a man who'd survived war, bankruptcy, and fatherhood with a heart that never hardened. Her favorite read, "Kindness isn't loud, it just doesn't flinch." She lived by it. At Waypoint 24, she was known for her calm demeanor. Whether it was a surgeon grabbing energy drinks or a teenager trying to steal cigarettes, she treated them the same, with gentleness. "People come apart differently," she once wrote, "but you don't have to come apart with them." That Thursday night had begun like any other. Snow fell in lazy spirals beneath a jaundiced sky. The store hummed with the low whine of coolers and overhead lights. Natalie restocked gum, swept salt from the entryway, and counted down the register drawer for the 3rd time. Midnight loomed. The roads were empty. And then she saw him. A man stood beneath the failing sign, just within the flicker of its reach. He didn't move, didn't approach. He stood with an eerie stillness, his frame thin beneath a heavy, olive-drab military coat. The coat hung like armor long outgrown. His back was straight, but time had hollowed his face. Snow clung to his shoulders like metals never received. Natalie watched him from behind the counter. Something about his silence stirred her, the rigid posture, the way he stood outside without flinching from the cold. He didn't knock, didn't look at the camera. He simply waited. She glanced at the security monitor. The man was just barely visible on the edge of one feed. Behind her, in the cooler, sat 5 egg salad sandwiches, labeled, "Discard after 12 a.m. Food meant for the trash in 30 minutes. Her shift manager, Troy Benson, sat in the back office watching the same cameras. She could imagine his voice already. "Loiterers are liabilities." But Natalie didn't see a loiterer. She saw her father, standing outside that terminal with nowhere left to go. And she knew, deep down in the part of her spirit that still held warmth despite all the cold, that this night was going to change everything. Midnight approached like a slow breath. The fluorescent hum of the store lights was the only sound inside Waypoint 24, punctuated by the occasional creak of the heater fighting to stay alive. Natalie Cooper stood behind the counter, staring at the CCTV screen above the register. In the grainy corner of one camera, the figure still stood outside, unmoving, a silhouette etched in snow beneath the flickering sign. The man hadn't knocked, hadn't come in to ask for warmth or coffee. He just stood there, his military coat barely concealing the frailty of his frame. Snow had begun to gather on his shoulders, collecting like forgotten metals. Natalie glanced toward the cooler. 5 egg salad sandwiches sat untouched on the middle shelf. She checked their labels. Sell by 12 a.m. In 15 minutes, they'd go into the trash. She thought of Troy Benson in the back office, the store manager whose voice always sounded like it was challenging someone. He had a deep mistrust of anyone who came near the store without buying something, especially at night. Troy called them hang-arounds, like they were aircraft cluttering a runway. Once, he denied a mother a cup of water for her child, saying it encouraged begging. Natalie had seen him earlier in the security office, leaning back in the only cushioned chair in the building, eyes fixed on the monitors like a hawk guarding a nest made of receipts. Still watching, she thought. Something about the man outside made her chest tighten. Not in fear, but in memory. Her father had worn a similar coat. Toward the end, when pride had kept him from asking for help, he'd looked just like that. Upright and cold, more statue than man. Dignity clung to him even after hope had faded. Natalie stepped toward the drink machine. She brewed a hot cocoa, stirring in extra marshmallows, then wrapped one of the sandwiches in a napkin and slid both items into a paper bag. The cocoa radiated heat through the bag like a heartbeat. She hesitated at the back door, fingers trembling on the handle. Stepping out, she was hit by the cold like a slap of silence. The man turned slowly as she approached, his face calm but unreadable. "Sir," she said softly, "would this help?" The man looked at the bag, then at her. He didn't reach out immediately, but when he did, it was with steady, deliberate hands. He took the offering like it was a medal being pinned to his chest. "Much obliged," he said, voice low, gravelly. She offered a quiet nod and turned back inside, the door shutting behind her with a whisper of snow. She had barely reached the register before Troy's voice cut through the stillness. "You gave away inventory," he said from the office doorway. Natalie turned to him. "It was going to be thrown out in 10 minutes. "That's not your decision," he snapped. "We have policies. You don't get to rewrite them because someone looks like your grandpa." She stood straighter. "It was food, going into a garbage can. I gave it to a person. You gave it to a vagrant. That's not charity. It's theft." He jabbed a finger toward the monitor. "I saw the whole thing, and now you're fired." There was no anger in her, no panic. She unfastened her name tag and set it on the counter with slow, careful hands. The sound it made, just a soft tap, felt louder than his voice. No goodbyes, no defense. She stepped into the night, snow brushing her cheeks. The man was gone. In his place, beneath the flickering sign, sat the empty cocoa cup, perfectly placed near the trash bin, like a final salute. Neat, respectful. She pulled her coat tighter and began the long walk home, her breath rising in the cold. Behind her, the store remained lit, unchanged. But inside her, something had shifted. A rule had been broken, but a truth had been honored. Not all losses are mistakes. By morning, snow had hardened on the sidewalks, turning to gray slush as buses and tired feet pushed through it. Natalie sat curled on the couch in their small apartment above the laundromat, staring at the muted television. Her coat was still on. She hadn't slept. Her mother, Elaine, sat across from her at the table, rubbing a heated pad over her lower back, wincing every so often as she moved. The radiator clanked, as if trying to comfort them both, but offered little warmth. Natalie's firing had traveled faster than the snowstorm. Someone, likely Troy himself, had leaked the security footage to a local Facebook group. He'd done it before with shoplifters, labeling them as thieves or drains on society. This time the caption read, "Employee gives away food without permission. Fired on the spot. Fair or not?" The clip showed Natalie handing off the sandwich and cocoa like she was smuggling gold bars out of Fort Knox. It spread quickly. Comments rolled in by the minute. "Rules exist for a reason. Too soft for retail. Let her learn the hard way. Feeding bums doesn't help them, it just attracts more. Thief in uniform. She stole from her employer." Natalie didn't respond to any of them. She didn't delete her account. She didn't defend herself. She just sat, watching. A text came in from her cousin, a pharmacy tech in Toledo. "You should have just followed the rules. Mom says you're making the family look bad." At noon, Natalie pulled on jeans and walked to a small diner 3 blocks away to ask about work. The owner barely looked up when she introduced herself. "Wait, you're the girl from that video?" he asked, tone more wary than curious. "Yes," she said honestly. He waved her off. "Can't have drama in here. Good luck." She turned to go, cheeks burning. As she stepped out into the wind, a young couple on the sidewalk did a double-take. The woman whispered something, then laughed. Natalie didn't ask what was said. She already knew. Back home, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ceiling. Elaine came in, her movements slow. "We needed that job, Natalie," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "I'm not blaming you, but we can't afford this kind of attention. Rent's due next week. Groceries. Heat." Natalie nodded. She didn't argue. She simply reached for her coat to put it away. As she lifted it from the chair, something clinked softly against the hardwood floor. She froze. It was a small silver insignia. She knelt to pick it up. In her palm lay a beautifully polished United States Air Force emblem, the kind worn on a dress uniform. Alongside it, folded neatly, was a note written on heavy parchment. Its edges creased, as if it had traveled far before finding her. She unfolded it slowly, her fingers trembling. Compassion holds its own ranks. R.C. Shepard. The name hit her like a breath caught in her chest. She turned to her laptop, typed in the name, and hit search. Colonel Richard C. Shepard. Bronze Star recipient. Former combat pilot. Prisoner of war in Iraq for 16 months. Released in a high-profile exchange. Retired with honor. Known not for politics or medals, but for a quiet humility that had earned him the loyalty of thousands. She stared at the man's image. Older now, hair silver, eyes the same sharp shade she had seen under the flickering sign. It was him, the man she gave the sandwich to. He hadn't just been cold. He was a legend, and he'd left her a message. Tears came then, not from shame, not from fear, but from something else. Something too wide for words. Amid the storm of ridicule and loss, this one silent man had looked past everything and seen her. Not just a girl behind a counter. Not just a moment, but something meaningful. The morning after her firing, Natalie stayed home. Outside, Willow Creek slushed through another bitter day, its gray streets indifferent to who rose or who fell. Inside their tiny apartment, Natalie sat beside the window with the Air Force insignia resting in her palm. She hadn't spoken much. Elaine moved around the apartment with quiet concern, heating up a can of soup and offering it in silence. Natalie barely noticed. She had searched Colonel Richard C. Shepard's name 3 times that morning, once out of disbelief, twice out of awe. Bronze Star. Former POW. Combat pilot. And now, the man she had handed a sandwich to outside a gas station. She had expected the world to remain quiet. Didn't. At exactly 7:02 a.m., the town of Willow Creek was shaken. First by a deep, rumbling sound, like thunder without lightning. Then came the blades, thup thup thup, reverberating off buildings and rooftops. Helicopters. Natalie stepped onto the fire escape in her pajamas. In the distance, 3 Black Hawk helicopters descended into the Waypoint 24 parking lot, snow blowing up like a curtain torn loose. Behind them, 7 dark SUVs and 2 military transport vehicles blocked the street. Neighbors flung open curtains. Car alarms triggered from the vibrations. Dogs barked, then fell silent. Natalie watched in stunned stillness as uniformed men and women filed out in formation. It wasn't a drill. It wasn't a protest. It was a mission, and their target was a convenience store. Troy Benson, bleary-eyed, had just opened the shop. He stepped out, half-buttoned shirt, confusion clouding his face. A woman in uniform approached him with quiet, formidable authority. Her name tag read Brigadier General Dawn Ellison. "You're the manager?" she asked. "Yes, what is this?" "We understand you terminated an employee here yesterday." "Yeah," he said cautiously. "She gave away food to a stranger. Violated store policy." "That stranger was Colonel Richard C. Shepard," she said without raising her voice. He buried his wife 2 days ago and walked 3 miles through a snowstorm because he refused to disturb anyone. Troy's mouth opened, but no words came. By now, the sidewalks were lined with people. Phones were raised. Journalists who normally reported on lost pets and potholes were live streaming from behind the barricades. "Where is Natalie Cooper?" the general asked. Natalie, still barefoot, arrived as if summoned by instinct. The crowd parted for her. No one told them to, but they did. "I'm here," she said softly, coat thrown over her flannel shirt. General Ellison turned and saluted. The air itself seemed to still. "On behalf of the United States Air Force and the Veterans Honor Foundation," the general said, "thank you. You acted with a dignity our service demands, even when others failed to see it." From the crowd stepped Colonel Shepard himself, no longer weather-worn and silent, but dressed in full uniform, medals neatly pinned, posture proud. He approached Natalie with slow, certain steps, his breath visible in the morning cold. "You didn't know my name," he said. "You didn't ask what I'd done. You just saw someone hungry." Natalie nodded, her voice caught in her throat. He reached into his coat pocket and held out a small black box. Inside was a certificate, sealed with a gold emblem, and beneath it, a card marked with the emblem of the Veterans Honor Foundation. "Full scholarship," he said. "Tuition, housing, supplies, everything you need to finish your paramedic certification." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Natalie stared at the box. Her hands trembled. Why?" she whispered. "Because character," he replied, "is proven when no one's watching." General Ellison stepped forward again. "Your kindness didn't go unnoticed, Miss Cooper. We're just making sure it's never forgotten." Troy tried to speak. I didn't know." The general didn't even glance at him. She turned to her team. "We're done here," and with that, the convoy departed. But what had changed, what everyone now saw, would remain. 6 months later, the sidewalks in Willow Creek had begun to bloom with planters. Small bursts of color set in cracked concrete. They weren't part of a beautification campaign. No city grant. Just neighbors, moved by something they couldn't quite explain, planting brightness where once there had only been gray. People started nodding to strangers more. The town didn't transform overnight, but it shifted quietly, the way winter melts into spring. Natalie Cooper, now 25, walked the halls of Cleveland Veterans Medical Center in slate blue scrubs and worn sneakers. She had traded night shifts for night classes and now classes for clinical rotations. Her days were longer, harder, but meaningful. She didn't grant interviews, declined 3 of them, in fact, said no to a morning show, turned down a book deal, and ignored the emails from documentary producers who wanted to capture the moment. Compassion became contagious. Her only explanation: "This story was never about me." She had everything she needed. The scholarship from the Veterans Honor Foundation covered her education and living expenses. Her mom, Elaine, finally retired from cleaning jobs, now volunteering part-time at the library shelving children's books. The walls of their apartment were still thin, but the laughter came easier. As for Waypoint 24, it remained open, though under new management. Troy Benson resigned quietly after weeks of being ghosted by corporate, harassed online, and ignored in staff meetings. He moved 2 towns over where no one knew his name. The new manager, a woman named Joelle, implemented a policy within her first week. All unsold food would be boxed up and delivered nightly to a local shelter. Above the register hung a simple brass plaque. "In honor of quiet compassion, June 17, 2025. The employees knew what it meant. Customers asked about it sometimes. Joelle just said, "Someone reminded us that kindness is part of the job." Natalie never once stepped foot back in that store. She didn't need to. On her birthday, a small brown parcel arrived at the medical center. No return address, just her name neatly handwritten. Inside was a worn copy of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. The inside cover bore a handwritten message. "Between right and rules, choose the right. Always. Arceus." She ran her thumb over the letters, smiled quietly, and tucked it into her bag. That night, She read it cover to cover in one sitting. Every Thursday, without fail, Natalie volunteered at a local shelter downtown. She never signed up for recognition, never posted photos. She served warm meals, stocked supplies, and sometimes sat in the hallway and listened to stories told in fragments by people with names rarely spoken aloud. No one there called her a hero. She preferred it that way. One day, a woman arrived with 2 children, their jackets thin and hands clasped tight. Natalie didn't ask their names. She just offered a smile, 2 bowls of soup, and a seat by the heater. One of the girls whispered, "Thank you," and Natalie replied, "You're safe now." Later that night, back in her journal, the one with dog-eared pages and her grandfather's quotes, she wrote, "Kindness doesn't need applause. It just needs someone who refuses to look away." When someone asked her months later if she regretted anything that had happened, the job lost, the ridicule, the isolation, she paused before answering. Then, with a small smile, said quietly, "No, I'd do it again." She didn't say it for drama or attention. She said it like a fact, like someone who had learned that sometimes the smallest decisions echo the loudest, because some things are always the right choice.
Hello everyone,